In September of 1921, 5 people were left behind on a frozen island in the Arctic Ocean. They were told rescue would come within a year. They were told the supplies were sufficient. They were told the island was rich with game. None of that was true. Over the next 2 years, 4 of them would die. Not in a storm, not in a shipwreck, not in a heroic final stand, but slowly, quietly, from hunger, illness, and abandonment. Only one would survive, and she was never supposed to be there. This is the story of the Wrangel Island Expedition, an Arctic experiment that turned into a death sentence. The early 20th century was an age of confidence. Explorers believed the map still had blank spaces to be claimed. Governments believed flags could secure sovereignty. And men like Bjorn Stefansson believed that the Arctic, long feared and mythologized, was not hostile at all. Stefansson did not see the polar regions as places of death. He called them friendly. To him, the Arctic was misunderstood. Properly approached, he argued, it could be lived in comfortably, even permanently, using local resources rather than heavy supplies from the south. It was a seductive idea, and a dangerous one. Bjorn Stefansson was an Icelandic-Canadian explorer who had spent years traveling with Inuit communities. He learned their hunting techniques, clothing methods, and survival strategies. Unlike many explorers, Stefansson rejected the idea of hauling massive food reserves. Instead, he promoted what he called living off the land. He believed starvation in the Arctic was not caused by nature, but by ignorance. This belief made him famous. It also made him reckless. By the end of World War I, Stefansson was no longer just an explorer. He was a public intellectual, a lecturer, and a man obsessed with proving that his Arctic philosophy could work on a grand scale. Wrangel Island would be his proof. Wrangel Island lies deep in the Arctic Ocean, north of Siberia. Remote, windswept, locked in ice for most of the year, but it held strategic value. Several nations had loosely claimed it over the years, but none had established permanent occupation. Stefansson saw an opportunity. If a group could live there year-round, Canada could claim sovereignty. More importantly, he could prove the Arctic was livable. The plan was not officially sponsored by the Canadian government. There was no military backing, no guaranteed supply chain. This was a private expedition, driven almost entirely by Stefansson's vision and his confidence. The plan was simple and fatally optimistic. A small group would land on Wrangel Island. They would hunt, trap, and survive using Arctic techniques. A relief ship would return the following summer. If all went well, the group would remain longer, establishing a permanent colony. Stefansson promised them this: if necessary, you can live there indefinitely. He would never test that claim himself. The men Stefansson recruited were young, very young. Alan Crawford, a 20-year-old Canadian, and Stefansson loyalist Fred Maurer, an American trapper. Lauren Knight, another American, inexperienced but eager. Milton Galley, also American with limited Arctic exposure. They were adventurous, ambitious, and dangerously underprepared. There was one more name. A woman. Ada Blackjack was an Inuit woman from Alaska. She was not hired as an explorer. She was hired as a seamstress and cook. Recently widowed, poor, desperate to support her young son, Ada accepted the offer without fully understanding where she was going. She spoke little English, she had no survival training beyond basic domestic skills, and she believed, as she was told, that she would be safe, that there would be men who knew what they were doing. She trusted them. Before departure, Stefansson reassured the team repeatedly. Wrangel Island had abundant wildlife. The climate was manageable. Rescue was guaranteed. The expedition left in September 1921 aboard a supply ship. It was already late in the season. That alone should have been a warning. The ship fought heavy ice before finally reaching Wrangel Island. The landing was tense, but successful. Supplies were unloaded, equipment stacked. A small camp was established. Then the ship turned back south. The 5 watched it disappear into the Arctic haze. That was the last time they would see another ship for almost 2 years. Almost immediately, reality began to contradict Stefansson's promises. Game was scarce. Seals and polar bears did exist, but not in the abundance they had been led to expect. Weather patterns were harsher than anticipated. Hunting was inconsistent. Food stores dwindled faster than planned. The men remained confident. At first, they still believed rescue would come in the summer. Ada worked constantly, sewing, cooking, repairing clothing. She followed orders. She stayed quiet. She was the only one who truly understood how fragile their situation was. As winter deepened, Lauren Knight fell ill. He showed signs of scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin deficiency, long known but still tragically common in polar expeditions. The men argued about responsibility, about leadership, about whether Stefansson had misled them, but the ice outside offered no solutions, only silence. By mid-1922, the ice should have broken. It didn't. No ship appeared. Weeks passed, then months. The realization came slowly and then all at once. They were alone. No rescue was coming, not this year. For the first time, fear replaced confidence. With food nearly gone and Knight too sick to travel, 3 men made a choice. They would attempt to walk across the ice to Siberia, over hundreds of miles of drifting, breaking flows. It was a desperate gamble. They left Ada behind. They promised to return with help. They never did. Ada Blackjack remained on Wrangel Island with one dying man. She had never been trained for this. She had never been meant to survive alone. And now, she had no choice. This is where the expedition truly ends, and where the real story begins. They left without knowing the ice beneath their feet was already moving. When Alan Crawford, Fred Moorer, and Milton Gall stepped away from the camp, they were not walking on solid ground. They were walking on a shifting surface, a fractured skin floating over the Arctic Ocean, driven by wind and current. Every step forward could become 2 steps backward overnight. They did not fully understand that yet. At first, progress felt possible. The men moved cautiously, pulling light sledges with what little they could carry: dried food scraps, rifles, ammunition, simple tools. They traveled during daylight, resting when visibility dropped. The ice appeared stable in patches. Thick ridges rose like frozen waves, forcing detours that cost time and energy. They had no precise maps of the drifting ice. Navigation relied on instinct, sun position, and estimation. Already, the margin for error was thin. What the man could not see was movement beneath them. Arctic pack ice does not remain stationary. Wind pressure and ocean currents can move entire fields of ice dozens of kilometers without visible warning. Each night while they slept, the ice carried them, sometimes south, sometimes west, sometimes backward. Morning progress did not guarantee actual advancement. They believed they were approaching Siberia. In reality, the ice was deciding otherwise. Within days, they encountered their first major obstacle: open leads. These were stretches of open water between ice floes, sometimes narrow, sometimes hundreds of meters wide. Some appeared calm, others churned violently, steam rising into the cold air. Crossing them required judgment. Too wide to jump, too unstable to trust. Sometimes they waited hours or days for refreezing. Sometimes they detoured for miles, burning calories they did not have. Each delay consumed food. Each detour increased exhaustion. The Arctic does not announce storms. Wind rose suddenly. Visibility collapsed. Snow erased landmarks. The men were forced to stop repeatedly, pitching temporary shelters against the wind. Cold penetrated clothing. Moisture froze instantly. Hands lost sensation. Frostbite was not dramatic. It was gradual. Numbness, stiffness, loss of control. They kept moving because stopping meant death. As days turned into weeks, tension emerged. Leadership was unclear. Alan Crawford had been Stefansson's loyal supporter, but loyalty offered no solutions here. Decisions were debated, sometimes too long, sometimes too late. How far to push, when to rest, when to turn back. Turning back was rarely discussed. Admitting failure felt worse than risking death. Their food supply was calculated for a journey that assumed progress, but drift erased distance. Detours erased planning. Rations were reduced. Hunger changed behavior. Conversations slowed. Movements became deliberate. Mistakes increased. Calories burned exceeded calories consumed. The math was unforgiving. Hunting opportunities were scarce. Seals surfaced unpredictably. Shots had to be precise. Ammunition could not be wasted. Missed shots echoed into nothingness. Birds were rare this far from land. Polar bears, while dangerous, were not easily encountered, and hunting one without backup was nearly suicidal. Food from the ice did not materialize. Fatigue set in unevenly. One man slowed first, then another. Feet swelled inside boots. Blisters froze. Muscles weakened. Simple tasks, tying knots, adjusting sled straps, became difficult with numb fingers. Falls became common. Each fall risked soaking clothing. Wet clothing meant freezing. At some point, they encountered a massive lead, open water stretching beyond visibility. Wading was dangerous. Crossing was impossible. They followed the edge, hoping it would narrow. It didn't. Days were lost skirting water that refused to freeze. The ice beneath them thinned. Cracks appeared more frequently. They slept lightly, afraid the ice would break beneath them during the night. Without landmarks, orientation became guesswork. Cloud cover erased the sun. Compasses were unreliable near the pole. They began to argue over direction. Small disagreements escalated. Stress stripped away patience. At least one of them likely fell through thin ice. This is not speculation, it is probability. Falling through Arctic ice does not guarantee immediate death, but it is catastrophic. Cold shock steals breath, muscles seize, panic surges. Survival requires immediate extraction and rapid drying. They may have pulled one another out, but soaked clothing would have frozen stiff within minutes. Damage would have been permanent. At some point, returning to Wrangel Island was no longer realistic. Distance, drift, exhaustion. Forward was the only option. Even if forward led nowhere, they continued. The final phase would not have been dramatic. No sudden collapse, just slowing. Steps shortened, breaks lengthened, silence deepened. Eventually, one man would have been unable to continue. The others faced a decision: stay and all die, or leave and hope. Given human behavior under starvation, they likely left. One body on the ice, two moving on. The group may not have died together. Arctic expeditions rarely end that way.
One man weakens, another pushes on, the last disappears into distance. Tracks vanish quickly in snow. Once separated, reunion is nearly impossible. No remains were ever found, no equipment recovered, no markers. Their deaths were not recorded, only inferred. They did not reach land. They did not reach help. The Arctic absorbed them completely. While the men vanished into ice, Ada Blackjack continued caring for Lorne Knight. She did not know when they died. She did not know where. She only knew they never returned. Knight weakened steadily. Without fresh meat, scurvy advanced. Pain became constant. Ada remained with him. She did not leave. Knight died quietly in June 1923. Ada buried him alone. She said no words. She returned to the shelter, now truly alone. Wrangel Island returned to silence. No voices, no movement, only wind over snow. After Lorne Knight's death, Ada Blackjack did not immediately leave the shelter. For a long time, she remained inside, sitting near the place where he had last been. The camp felt different now. Not emptier, but heavier. There were no voices left to fade, no breathing to listen for in the night. Only silence. She had buried him herself, digging into ground that resisted every movement. The soil beneath the surface was still frozen, forcing her to work slowly, carefully, conserving strength. She wrapped his body, lowered it into the shallow grave, and covered it as best she could. There was no marker visible from afar, no sign that anyone had ever lived or died there. When she returned to the shelter, she closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. She was now completely alone on Wrangel Island. The days that followed had no structure. There were no schedules to keep, no responsibilities to share, no conversations to interrupt the wind. Ada adjusted her routine to the simplest possible form: survive the day. She woke when light entered the shelter. She ate when food was available. She rested when exhaustion forced her to stop. Hunting became her only task. Without help, every trip outside carried risk. She moved cautiously, scanning constantly for polar bears. She carried her rifle everywhere, even for short distances. She rationed ammunition carefully. Every bullet mattered. When birds appeared, she waited patiently. When seals surfaced, she remained motionless for hours if necessary, knowing that movement could ruin the only chance she might have that day. Some days she succeeded. Some days she didn't. Fear became a constant presence, not sharp panic, but quiet awareness. At night, she slept lightly, listening for sounds outside the shelter. Wind often mimicked footsteps. Shifting ice created cracks that echoed like movement. Polar bears were a real threat. One encounter could end everything. She kept her rifle within reach even while sleeping. Despite exhaustion, she remained alert. Loneliness pressed in slowly. Without other people, time lost meaning. Days blended together. Ada began speaking aloud to herself, sometimes narrating simple actions just to hear a human voice. She sang softly while sewing or cleaning equipment. She avoided thinking about the future. Hope was dangerous. Expectation led to disappointment. Instead, she focused on what could be controlled: warmth, food, shelter. As weeks passed, subtle changes appeared in the environment. The sun lingered longer above the horizon. Ice conditions shifted slightly. Bird activity increased. Ada noticed these signs, but did not allow herself optimism. She had expected rescue before. It had not come. She continued her routine without assuming anything would change. Each morning began the same way: check supplies, check surroundings, prepare for another day alone. She no longer marked time. One day, while scanning the horizon, Ada noticed something unfamiliar. At first, she dismissed it. The Arctic played tricks on perception. Light bent strangely across ice and water. Shapes appeared and vanished, but the shape returned. Movement where there should have been none. She watched carefully. Then she saw smoke. A vessel was approaching Wrangel Island. Ada froze, uncertain whether to believe what she was seeing. She did not run immediately. She watched, waiting for confirmation. The ship grew larger. It was real. For the first time in nearly 2 years, another human presence was coming toward her. Ada moved quickly, but deliberately. She grabbed her rifle and fired into the air. She waved fabric. She stepped into open view, making herself visible against the snow. The ship changed course. It was coming closer. When the crew came ashore, they expected to find a group of survivors. They found one woman, thin, exhausted, alive. Ada Blackjack stood before them quietly. She did not collapse, she did not cry, she did not speak immediately. She had survived not through strength, but through persistence. As Ada boarded the ship, she looked back at the island briefly. Wrangel Island remained unchanged. No movement, no sign of life, no indication of what it had taken. The camp was left behind, so were the graves. On board the ship, Ada was given food, warmth, and rest. Her body adjusted slowly. Her mind took longer. Noise felt overwhelming. Conversations felt distant. She answered questions simply. What happened to the men? They left. They never returned. The Wrangel Island Expedition was over. 4 people were dead. One survived. There were no dramatic conclusions, no celebration, no closure, just a woman returning home after being forgotten. Ada Blackjack did not speak often about Wrangel Island afterward. She returned to her life quietly. The Arctic had not given her meaning, it had given her survival. The story of Wrangel Island ends without witnesses. No final message, no explanation, just people who were left behind and one who endured long enough to leave. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed true stories of lost expeditions, survival, and human endurance, consider subscribing to the channel and watching the next video. More stories are waiting.